With these two architectural designs, Brunelleschi established a new classicizing architecture as the standard in the Renaissance and beyond, up until the modern day. So these are two buildings that we need to understand in depth and detail. In terms of funding, patronage, the Ospedale degli Innocenti, the foundling hospital or orphanage essentially, was funded by a guild of silk manufacturers and goldsmiths, the Arte della Seta Guild in Florence. And so this is an example of what you've been learning about, that guilds were a form of civic association that actually had an important involvement in the welfare projects for the welfare of the people, the vulnerable members of the society. And the second important building, the Church of San Lorenzo, is the Medici neighborhood church. So in terms of the audience, the patrons here, the Medici are the wealthiest and most influential family in Florence. So these are big projects, public projects. And what Brunelleschi does in terms of his vision is will have a massive effect. So take a look at what you're seeing and reflect on it. The orphanage exterior here is a very simple design, an arcade with round arches and only modest decoration. These little rondelles, meaning circular round forms that contain little sculptures of cute little babies. Think about the implications of this. Gone is everything that you saw painstakingly built up over centuries to make the Gothic. Pointed arches, dainty decorations, everything that made the Gothic the prestige style. So compare it for a moment to the tower that is in front of the cathedral where Brunelleschi built the dome. This tower was actually designed by Giotto. But it's here to show you, look at all this dainty detail, all this ornamentation, all these pointed arches, verticality. This is all the aesthetic of the Gothic that was everyone's expectation for the norm. So in contrast, this design must have seemed starkly plain to the eyes of the people at the time. And the interior, shown here at the right, of the Church of San Lorenzo, this shows you the tremendous leap that Brunelleschi made when you compare it to the nave of Rheims Cathedral. It's as if Brunelleschi is deliberately setting out to undo the entire Gothic tradition. So this design is one we need to understand deeply because this church is a turning point. The floor plan that's presented with it is a little bit confusing because this building, this design that Brunelleschi creates, will be so famous that the Medici will add on to it. So they'll add on in the 1500s a library, which will actually be designed by Michelangelo, and then an additional sacristy. A sacristy is a room for storing sacred objects. So you have to imagine that we're focusing really on this structure here, the nave with these stubby transept arms, with its square version of an apse, that's notable, and this additional square building that is a sacristy, which is where Brunelleschi actually first tried out his ideas that he developed in this church. So Brunelleschi's design is classicizing because he returns to the clarity and rationality of ancient Greek and Roman architecture. So look how he uses freestanding columns, not those slender, engaged colonnettes that are used in Rheims and other Gothic cathedrals. His now are very clear in terms of their basic geometric form, a rational form, and they declare their reason for being included in the design. Their functionality, they support the upper story. They don't hide their functionality the way the Gothic colonnettes do by becoming ornamental elements in a decorative, complex wall. Brunelleschi uses rounded arches because they are true to the Greco-Roman past, but also because they are a pure geometric form, a half circle. And this is pretty bold if you think about it, since he's basically negating the whole technical achievements of pointed arches and ribbed groin vaults that were the hallmark of the Gothic gloriousness. So he's got a flat roof here. He's rejecting the height of the Gothic ideal of reaching toward heaven. Instead, he's giving us a roof that's brought down to human level and is a simple, understandable, rational shape, with squares, repeated squares, being the systematic and restrained decoration. And of course, squares are very much a symbol of human rationality. And then think about light, because it was height and light that made Gothic so magical. It was all about the stained glass being the mysterious light of heaven. Now we have no stained glass. We have a very pure geometric form, the circle, letting in light. And this light, I'm saying here, expresses the clear light of human reason. This is a light that is not hiding or shimmering or veiling. It is with the shape and the light pouring in itself. It is a kind of instrument of clarity. When you start to look, you see that Brunelleschi's entire design is organized through repetition of circles and squares. Circular windows, square coffers in the ceiling. The columns are circular, but they have what are called impost blocks set in. So we alternate with the round and the square. And there is a dome. You know Brunelleschi loves his domes. There is a circle of a dome within the square that makes the crossing of the transept and the nave. This meeting of the circle and the square is actually a profound humanist statement, as you see in Leonardo da Vinci's use of the circle and the square in his famous drawing Vitruvian Man. Da Vinci draws what he considers an ideal male body. The drawing is a demonstration of ideal proportions. And this ideal man reaches out and touches the circle, which represents the timeless realm. A circle is a symbol of the infinite, since a circle has no beginning and no end. It is associated with the divine, with God, with the absolute, with timelessness. Yet at the same time, his arms also are defined by the limits of the square, which traditionally symbolizes the finite, the limited, the reality of boundedness, and so the terrestrial realm. Leonardo da Vinci shows us that the human being straddles both. Interestingly, Leonardo is also thinking about architecture. This drawing is titled Vitruvian Man because Leonardo studied the writings of an ancient Roman writer named Vitruvius, and Vitruvius wrote about architecture. His writings on architecture explained the Greek and Roman ideas that the beauty and functionality of a building depends on its proportions. Vitruvius actually compares the proportions used in classical buildings to the proportions of bodies. And Leonardo is thinking about the proportional relationship of the different parts of the body, such as the upper arm to the forearm, to the hand, to the chest, as interrelated systems of proportions that create harmony and beauty. So let's go back to Brunelleschi at San Lorenzo. He had also, like Leonardo da Vinci, studied classical proportions in architecture, and his entire design is based on a system of mathematical ratios. So how does this work? Well, he starts with the crossing square, where you have the square and the circle, which measures 20 by 20 braccia. Braccia is a unit of measurement, and it corresponds it's defined as, it's based on the outstretched arms of a man. So back to Leonardo here, where his Vitruvian Man is standing with outstretched arms. Look at that distance. That's about a braccia. So having established that this square is 20 by 20 braccia, Brunelleschi makes it the standard from which everything else is measured and proportioned. So the side aisles have a ratio of 1 to 2. They're 10 by 10 braccia, 1/2. And then we go to 1 to 3 for these little chapels that are furthest on the side. And he uses the same proportions for the relationships of height and in between columns, because he understands how deeply Greek and Roman architecture was not just about how columns looked, but about an underpinning mathematical ratio. So here's a page of a Renaissance book that reprinted Vitruvius's book on architecture that Brunelleschi and Leonardo da Vinci are drawing from. And this is a page with drawings to illustrate how the columns can have different systems of proportion, but that all has to be interrelated. There has to be a governing ratio. And so the most famous work of classical Greek architecture is a mess. It's a ruin, the Parthenon, because it was basically exploded when the Turks stored some explosives in there. But it was entirely designed around an algebraic equation, a ratio of 4 to 9. And so every single measurement, the diameter of the columns to the height of the columns, the space between the columns, all followed this rule. It was all about finding rules, because to the Greeks, this was about actually tuning the building to the music of the spheres. The Greeks noticed that the instruments that we play to make music, many of the most beautiful ones, such as, let's say, the guitar or the violin, they have strings. And you tune the strings by tightening or loosening them, by making them longer if you're loosening them, or shorter if you're tightening them. And the sound is either harmonious or unpleasant, depending on the ratio of each string to the other. They felt that this meant that the music of the spheres, the heavens themselves, were moving and dancing in a ratio according to a divine music. And if you made your building beautiful enough and you followed the ratios and the math perfectly, your building would be tuned to the music of the spheres of the heavens. So what I want you to understand is that this classicizing architecture that Brunelleschi creates at San Lorenzo is not just about the vague look of the classical past with columns and arches. It's much more rigorous than that. It's actually about creating systems of interrelated measurements, because he is thinking like a Greek or Roman, that he wants to create calm, beauty, harmony, and order, and that he will do that by actually creating a mathematical rule, a mathematical system that will control everything. This is going to lead to classical architecture becoming the major architectural expression in Western Europe. And Gothic is going to be a thing of the past. This completely does away with Gothic, so that moving forward in time into the 1500s and then the 1600s and the 1700s, buildings that are based on this kind of thinking and on the clarity of circles and squares and these beautiful proportions, they are going to be the important architecture, the architecture that suggests magnificence and meaning. And that style of architecture will inform the kind of architecture of our civic culture today. So here you are looking at classicizing architecture as it is expressed in Washington, D.C. Why are all those buildings filled with columns and white marble? Because of Brunelleschi. Because of what Brunelleschi was understanding the classical past to be a an expression of the human mind's capacity for rationality and for harmony